I thought before I proceeded too much farther, I should take this lure and crack it open and show you what's inside, because I always make lures out of two pieces. This is how I put in my stainless steel. This is different than Greg does. This little clip is interesting because you can actually make that one complete bend, but this is 2mm stainless steel, really hard to work with. This is a technique I use with 3/32 stainless steel, because you would never be able to make a tight bend with 3/32. So lures like this that have the 3/32, you couldn't make one continuous. At least I can't. So what I do is I take my blank, I glue it together very, very lightly. I mean extremely lightly. A little spot here, 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 maybe over here, and then I shape it. Now I use a tabletop belt sander to shape it. So after I do the rough shaping, I do some hand sanding, quite a bit of hand sanding, and prior to all of this, I have put a channel down the center with my table saw. So that's almost one of the first things I do. Now, obviously the reason to do that is to contain the stainless steel through wire. And it's always centered, because you control where that channel is. And one of the things I also do is I decide on the lead. So this lure has a lead pour hole in it, and I'm going to be pouring molten lead down in here. And you might say to yourself, wow, like, are we going to start on fire? No, not really. It smokes a little bit, fair enough. But I also have a technique where I chisel out. This is the little chisel that I use. Very cheap chisel out of a carving set. Had it for years. Pretty good steel actually. And I scoop this stuff out. And what I do to figure out the weight of this thing is I put tape, masking tape on the ends and cover up the holes. And I put lead shot. And I weigh the lead shot plus the half of the wood body. And that gives me a rough idea of what this thing is gonna weigh. Is it accurate to a couple grams? Probably not. It's probably accurate plus or minus 5, maybe 10 grams. And of course, you've got to duplicate this hole on the other side as well. So after this is all done, and after the stainless steel has been fit to both sides, you close it up and you glue it. And I have a whole bunch of little clamps to do that. So once you've got that all glued up, you're ready to put the lead in. So I've got a little melting pot, and it produces a very fine dribble of molten lead, and it's very, very easy to fill that up. So once this is filled, of course, you're going to cover up this hole, and you'll never ever see it again. In fact, I'll show you here. This one's got the same hole here, and there's no way you're going to say, well, there's the hole. I can cover up those holes beautifully. Now, one thing that is missing on this blank right now is the eye socket. And once I get it filled with lead, I will drill out the eye socket, and you're going to position these cheek patches in respect to the eye socket. Now this one is not made for this, so it doesn't fit quite right, but by the time you see this lure again, it will have been glued together. It'll have its lead put in, and it'll have eye sockets, and then we can actually get into the details of how you attach the 3D cheeks. And again, we're going to be using this extra thin CA glue to do that. So I've done quite a bit of work on this wood blank since you've seen it last. As I mentioned to you previously, the first thing I did is I had to fit the stainless steel through wire in the belly loop to the channels inside, and I had to use a little wood chisel to do that. Once it fit, I was able to then glue both halves together using my Elmer Pro Bond Max. Very, very good glue, actually rated for underwater use. And after that had dried for 24 hours, I then put lead in it. I poured molten lead in my lead borehole here. I've since then used some filler, some LePage's plastic wood. It's a very, very good filler. And I'll be putting a second type of filler on top of that after it's been sanded. So, in order to seal the lure from water getting in, I've dribbled in Gorilla 5-minute epoxy into all of the openings. One at a time. You put it in, you dribble it down, it hardens, and then you move on to the next one. Now the nice thing about this Gorilla 5-minute epoxy is when you mix it up, it does stiffen in 5 minutes, but it doesn't really get hard for about 2 days, maybe even 3. So for 2 days I have the opportunity of using a razor knife to trim any excess off that 5-minute epoxy. Now the last thing I've done is I've drilled the eye sockets. Now these are absolutely crucial to have in order to fit your gills. So how do I make these little patches for the gills and the fins? Easy to see them sitting here on the cardboard, but how do I get there? One of the first things I do is I take a picture of the lure. Now, in this case, I happen to have the 5-inch lure, but you can also take the pictures off Greg's website or any lure that you want to put gills on. So, just a few hints on how to do that. You noticed I have a scale here, which I put into Microsoft Word. I spent quite a bit of time making sure that the scale was exactly 1 inch. So when I put a 5-inch lure on it, it turns out to be 5 inches. So the lure that we're using right now is actually a 6-inch. Now, the way I do that is when I paste this picture of the 5-inch in, it comes in at some scale factor, and then of course I make it, this one is 5.5 inches, and then I copy it in again, and then I make this 6 inches, and that way it expands the lure equally in all directions. So if you notice, this one fits very well over that one. Then what I do is I cut out a lure. Now this is just paper. But then what I do, you can see in this picture the contour of the gills. There's one contour and there's another one. So it shouldn't surprise you that you can just simply cut those out . Now, bear in mind this is going to be a 2-gill lure. So I'll show you in a minute how you make the second gill plate. So once you've got this, it's pretty easy. You grab yourself a piece of cardboard, and you simply trace it. Now I like to use a nice fine nibbed pen. This is a high-tech point. I don't even know if they made them. I bought 3 cases of these many years ago and I just love them. And then you trace these stripes. Now you're going to need two of these, but they will go on back to back, of course. One on one side of the lure, one on the other side of the lure. We'll draw the second one. Now bear in mind that this gill plate is coming from a 2D world because I've taken a picture of a 3D object. It shouldn't surprise you when I go to fit this 2D object onto a 3D lure, I may have to adjust it. Alright, get yourself a good set of cutters. Now this is the thicker cardboard that I'm using. The thin cardboard is 0.5 millimeter, and the thicker cardboard is 1.2 millimeter. So I'm using the thicker stuff. Now, one of the other little tips and tricks I can offer you is to keep track of which is the top and which is the bottom, because after a while these little pieces float around and you can wind up gluing one upside down fairly easily. Okay, so there's the gill. Now there are two important things that you're trying to accomplish here. Once you get this glued on, you're going to have to contour these edges so they blend in with the fish. So your design needs to kind of end somewhere in here and somewhere near the top. And you can kind of move it around a little bit and now, also bear in mind that there's going to be 2 layers here, not just the one. So I like to put a little bit of a mark there. So, in order to make the second gill, what I do, you're going to want the second gill to be almost on top of the first one. So what I do is I'm going to draw another one, which I have. And then I'm going to, they should start roughly at the same spot. And just simply draw it in. Now, if you don't like it, you can modify it. I want a little bit more showing here. there you have your second gill patch. Now, when we go to glue that on, we have to glue the first one on by itself and then come back and add this one. And what we're going to do, see how I pulled it back just a little bit here? We're going to be putting wood filler in here. And it helps to do the contour easier if it's a two-step process rather than one big steep wall. The same issues that we used, same technique we used for the gills, we'll use the fins. The fins are cut out in a very similar way. Bear in mind also that you need two of each of these, left side, right side. And again, for this fin, notice that I've cut it out again on the picture. Tricky tracing a thin piece of paper. That looks good. So there we have the 3D gills, basically ready to go. Now I need to give you a little lesson in CA glue. We've talked about extra thin. First time I didn't even know it existed until Greg pointed it out. And this has got a mind of its own. It's hard to control. The regular CA glue that you find is actually a medium thickness. And then you can get the gel. So you have the three types. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to stick on this gill using the medium glue to just tag it down in around the edges. Same with the fin as well. And then we're going to use the thin stuff to saturate the cardboard, because ultimately what you want is you want your wood and your gills to be one piece. And of course the reason for the extra thin is so the CA glue will go deep into the cardboard. Now I will admit that when you're sanding sometimes, if the CA glue hasn't got all the way in, you'll find that you sand your way through the CA glue and you may have to give it a second coat just after you've done your initial sanding. And actually, so what you're going to wind up here with is a set. Gill. Now it's important to know which gills go where, because you don't want to put one on backwards. And the next thing that we do is we're going to start using some Sea glue and actually doing some real work.